While the raw number of ski areas has been declining, number one, it stabilized about 25 years ago. It stabilized around 2000. It's been, plus or minus 500 in a pretty, consistent line since then. The amount of skiable acreage, which is how ski areas consider themselves, it's a common industry metric, has increased by more than the equivalent of if we had added another Colorado.
We are going to talk about investing in skiing, one of my favorite topics. Specifically, Vail Resorts, MT in stock. It's down 53% over the past 5 years. What's the story there? Is global warming killing the industry? Here in the East, we've had a great winter. In the West, they've had almost nothing. But even more so than this, I'm going to talk about this with really one of the most interesting, perhaps even the most interesting people to me in the skiing industry. His name is Stuart Winchester. And 6 years ago, he, out of nowhere, started the Storm Skiing Journal, which is now a podcast as well. He basically created his own niche discussing lift serviced skiing. So I want to lift serviced skiing, excuse me. I want to unpack Stuart's story as well, because he knows everybody in this space. And he is literally the best person on this earth, in my view, to be talking about this topic today. So Stuart, welcome.
Thanks, James. Thanks for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. To make your story a little stranger, I am based in New York City, which is a very strange place to be a ski bum, but it's an odd place, I guess, but you can get anywhere in the world from New York City pretty easily. So I managed to ski about 50 days a year, usually at about 50 to 60 ski areas. So I'm out there, I'm seeing it, I'm seeing all the things going on, and I have a good sense of what's working and what's not across the North American ski industry.
And it's all tax deductible, right? Because that's your business.
That's right. It's all set up
Didn't they
as a
say
business.
Miami used to have the biggest ski club in the U.S. at one point, perhaps because it was so far from ski hubs, right?
Florida and Texas have very strong contingents of skiers because one of the things you need to be a skier is money. And those places happen to have a lot of it.
Yep. And I guess, they flock together. So let me just back up, Stuart. So you have the Storm Skiing Journal and podcast. Stormskiing.com is the URL, and we'll put that on the screen in the notes in a minute. People say it's a common marketing thing in business. It's one thing just to compete a little bit better against the competitors. It's another thing just to kind of form your own niche. And that sounds great, but it's almost impossible to do. But you did it. How did that start?
So I had a very smart professor in college who said, I really like your writing. If you want to be a writer, find something no one else is writing about and write about only that. Now, when she said that to me in 1998, there was actually a lot of good ski writing going on. And I always did want to be a ski writer because growing up in the 90s as a skier, I started as a teenager, there was a lot of really high quality ski journalism going on. And these were publications, Ski and Skiing, that were produced here in New York City. They were made by Time Life. They were held to the same standards as Sports Illustrated or any of their other mainstream publications. Over time, those faded for a couple of reasons. The first is that ski media went way too rad. They way overcorrected. When I started reading, they would write stories about Mad River Glen, this cool ski area in Vermont, or a week at Vail. And it got more and more to, here's a story of 5 cool guys hiking into Pakistan and jumping off a cliff. And it's like, all right, I'll never do that because even if I could organize the ability to do that, it's remote and probably beyond my skill level. So combine that with the fact that ski journalism, like most niche journalism, did not handle the transition to digital well at all. And fast forward to mid 2010s, and what you had was a vacuum of ski journalism. There was, on the one side, sort of what I'd call press release reprints, sort of industry trades. On the other side, a focus on rad guys jumping off things, like I said. And the vacuum was filled by social media, which I call a high passion, low information environment. No one was talking to skiers anymore. Simultaneously, I had gotten a journalism degree that I was not using because I graduated from journalism school 1 month before my daughter was born, and I'm so happy for her. She's going to college now, but it was not a good time to be a novice journalist. So I ended up in corporate communications. So I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, man, I really miss the ski content that I used to read about ski areas. Like, that's what I love is ski areas. I don't want to go in the backcountry because I'm afraid of avalanches and afraid of breaking my leg and afraid of getting lost. And I want an organized experience. And no one was really talking about that in the media. And when you go to Facebook enthusiast groups on skiing, they weren't talking about the guy doing a backflip off a cliff. They were talking about the new lift at Killington. So that's what people wanted information about. So I said, all right, Substack is this new tool that's out. I'll never forget this. I was riding the L train home, the subway one day from work, and I worked at Viacom in Times Square, and I was reading this New York Times article about Substack and these new newsletter platforms. I thought, man, I could make this work because I'm not a tech guy. I never wanted to run a website. I just wanted to write. But anytime you go to something like WordPress, it was a lot of to do to try to get it going. So Substack was this amazing tool for writers, and I know it has some controversy, but for me personally, it has been great because what it allowed me to do by taking care of all the tech in the back end, it is to just focus on the writing, just focus on the content, and they help with distribution. They're always constantly making it better, and they make it really easy to drop in a paywall. So I launched this in 2019, built up the audience for about 2 years, took it paid in January 2022, and then as of August 2024, it's been my full-time job. So it's a good little small business, right? That a guy with kids who lives in New York City can survive on. So what I, you know, getting back to my professor who said find something no one else is writing about and write about only that. So like I said, no one else was, I didn't think, using a journalistic approach to ski areas. So I decided to dedicate each podcast episode to the leader of a different ski area. And I would devote the newsletter to analyzing the lift served skiing experience. There's about 500 ski areas in the United States, give or take 10 or 15 any given year. And they're all incredibly different. They're incredibly unique. I love this merging of nature and man, the way that you take the environment and you craft it. It's like Central Park in New York City. It's completely manufactured, but it looks natural. And that's what a ski
Yeah.
area is. And I love the way that they're all different and they're all crafted by humans to be different. So, what are the lifts you take? What is the terrain that's available? Do they groom it all? Do they leave some tree runs open? Is there a terrain park? Do they have a carpet? Where's the lodge? Are they on one of these big passes, the Epic Pass and the Icon Pass or the Indy Pass? How do you get to them? Are they throttled by traffic? Are they charging $300 a day for a lift ticket? So that entire experience of the skier is what I focused on. And it turns out there's a nice little audience for that. And so here we are in 2026 talking to James Early.
It seems like, and I'm glad, I'm honored to be talking with you, Stuart. What would you do if you hadn't done this? I'm just curious.
Well, I was on a nice corporate track. I worked for, so out of journalism school, I graduated in 2008. I worked at the National Basketball Association for 5 years. I was a speechwriter for the late David Stern, the president of WNBA.
Mhm.
Also did a little bit of work with Adam Silver, the current, and I ran their intranet and did a lot of writing and corporate and executive writing. Then I transitioned on to AIG, short lived, bad fit, and then I ended up at Viacom for 10 years and was there through the transition to Paramount and ran their intranet and was on an internal communications track. And I had a nice little VP job and it was great. And the benefits were great. And Paramount was a great company to work for. And I have absolutely zero complaints about that. And that was the longest job I ever had was 10 years. So I probably would have stayed on that track and continued to do corporate communications in New York City. Plenty of jobs. I had plenty of experience and I'm qualified for it. But I really had a creative part of me that was not being tended to. And that more than even writing about skiing is what I'm really happy with the storm because, we connected over the fact that you used to work at Motley Fool and I always liked their writing style and the storm. I always say skiing is fun. Reading about it should be too. And so I try to make it fun to read most of the time.
Well, I'm certainly glad you didn't end up in that Plan B career path and are doing what you're doing. I've enjoyed a lot of your content. Before I shift to the industry stuff, is there a favorite or a few favorite podcasts that jump out at you?
As far as what I like to listen to?
No, no, that you did interviews. I should say
Oh,
interviews.
so it's funny because there's an assumption from skiers in general, and I understand this because I had the same assumption, that the bigger the mountain, the harder the interview is to get, but it's actually the opposite
Huh.
because Steamboat and Vail Mountain and Palisades Tahoe and Killington have staff and they have media training and they have a marketing department. But Plattekill Mountain in the Catskills in New York City, 3 hours away from where I am right now, is run by Laszlo and Danielle, who bought it in 1993 and painstakingly installed snowmaking up the hill and are the only reason the place is still in business. They literally have 25 jobs apiece. So the best conversations, and you'll probably appreciate this from your time in finance, the best conversations are with people who don't have bosses. And that usually means Jim, who owns this little hill, 40 miles off the highway. So one of my favorites is Whitecap, Wisconsin. David,
That's mine
yeah,
too.
okay,
That's mine too.
okay. Oh,
He was
that's
crying.
great.
He was almost crying
Yeah,
in the interview, right?
yeah,
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 amazing interview.
yeah. He laid it all out. He was passionate. He'd had some challenges in life. He had some really inspiring stories about working through that, and that one got a lot of attention. And it's funny because I think the listener of the storm is someone who generally will listen to all of the episodes because there's not a ton more downloads for the super big ones like a Steamboat than there is for the White Caps. Now, if it's like Rob Katz, CEO of Vail, then those will get more. But I would say White Cap I really really liked, and there's been a lot of good ones over the years. I really like talking to this fellow Brad Wilson who runs a ski area, Bogus Basin in Idaho, because
Mhm,
he's
mhm.
someone who always wanted to be a GM, but it took him 30 years to get there, and he really uh, followed that route, and he's just a really smart, nice guy. Yeah, I could think of a few more. Sometimes people ask me on the side like, "What's your least favorite?" And honestly, people show up. They're yeah, they don't really put to be in charge of a ski resort. You have to have some level of charisma and people ability. So I haven't really had that bad experience yet where I had someone who was, really a turnoff, but yeah, so lots of really good ones, um, going back in history. Danielle and Laszlo, who I mentioned on
Mhm.
Plattekill, have been on there twice.
Heard that one too. What
Yeah,
strikes me is just how much gumption, stick to itiveness, perseverance you have to run a ski area. And the Whitecap
yeah.
guy is just a great example of that. Wasn't there a fire? Like all these things have happened, and he just keeps finding some way to push through. And there's logistical fortitude, but there's just something. There's an emotional fortitude that it begs of you as well. And he clearly has that. And I don't think many people do.
No, many people do not, and one I always joke that one big thing I've learned from doing this podcast and newsletter is that I do not want to run a ski area. And there's this funny episode of How I Met Your Mother where, Barney and Ted are sitting there and the voiceover says, "We uttered the word that every man does at some point in his life. Let's buy a bar." And I played off that a little bit in newsletter because every skier at some point says, "Let's buy a ski area." But honestly, it sounds like the most miserable thing ever. I have so much respect for these guys and so much more now in appreciation for what they do. I'm a rambler. I like to ski dozens of ski areas every year. I've always been like that, even pre Mega Pass. And I think that was a byproduct of growing up in Michigan where the ski areas were small, but there were a lot of them, and I could travel around between them relatively easily. So yeah, it's a unique skill set. It requires a lot of stamina, a lot of patience, a lot of empathy, a lot of delegating and willingness to put ego aside and delegate. A lot of trusting people to do their jobs, and this very puzzling, which my brain hurts every time I even think about it. The seasonal labor hiring and the cyclicalness of it, and having to really over prepare for those 12 days a year when you have the perfect storm of holiday and Saturday and sun and new snow. So, yeah, I've met some really inspiring people through this podcast that really uh, demonstrate all those qualities and this great sense of leadership and really I think a lot of them would be great in any business. Skiing has a lot of extra benefits, but also some extra burdens.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember a couple of years ago, visiting Bluebird Backcountry, which is not lift service, it was this kind of roving thing, and
Hmm.
I thought, "My god, these guys had to set up these tents every year, and, like, they're trying to get the condensation out, and then they've got all the rentals, and they've got,
Yeah.
the merchandising and all," it's a lot of fuss. I mean, that's kind of like the industry in microcosm, right? I mean, it comes and goes, and the ski resorts come and go. They're on the decline in terms of number of ski areas, but I think as you pointed out, the space is actually increasing. So, let me segue, Stuart, to just kind of catching someone up who's new to the industry.
Hmm.
We used to have a lot of ski areas here. A lot is relative. We maybe still have a lot, but in the 60s and 70s was probably about the peak. By raw numbers, they've been going down.
Hmm.
I believe, and you'll know, and I don't know totally, but like skiing was sort of saved by snowboarding
Hmm.
once, and skiing has quasi been saved again by these passes. But there's a little bit of like a game theory, a deal with the devil. What I mean by that is, you look at Vail Pass and it's whatever, $750 for the Epic Pass, Vail Resorts' Epic Pass. And you think, ah, crap. They're trying to charge $300 or whatever for a lift ticket. I might as well just buy the pass. And, that within, 2 or 3 days, I've covered it. Well, if you got a family of four and you're not sure about skiing, that's a big, big jump, right?
Hmm.
Um, and to the industry's credit, they've made a very clear effort to get like beginner packages, welcome to skiing packages, and if you can get over pull yourself up off the floor from the initial shock of that price, maybe you buy them. But like, and I'm digressing a little bit, but some might say it feels kind of predatory, knowing
Hmm.
that somebody would want to charge me 300 and something bucks if they could get away with it. Maybe it doesn't sit well. So, what would you say? Let me distill this to an actual question, okay, rather than a James Early ramble. But like, how healthy is the ski industry writ large?
Hmm.
What has happened in terms of there are a lot of these dead resorts? I think there's a website cataloging the dead ski areas of the
Hmm.
U.S., but yet you say it's basically still okay as an industry. Is that accurate?
So the ski industry is in very good shape right now in North America. And I can't speak as granularly about other markets, but we have a number of metrics to suggest that this is true. One of them is the number 1 through 5 ever years for skier visits have all occurred within the past decade, including low snow years. And what you start to see when you put those numbers alongside the growth of the Epic and Icon passes is that when the Icon Pass debuted for the 2018 to 19 season, we started to see a much more snow agnostic visitor pattern among skiers than we historically had. So, yes, 2022 to 23, best snow year ever. Alta gets 903 inches. That was number one, right? But the next year, the snow wasn't so good, and it still came in, I think, number four.
Hmm.
And if you go back to 2018, if you take out 2019 to 20, which of course was truncated because we had the COVID shutdowns around March 14th for most ski
Yep.
areas in North America, every year we're on a 7 or 8 year run of landing in the top 10 all time for skier visits.
Wow.
So,
And that's
so that's
because
what
of the passes.
my theory is that it's because of the passes and the National Skiers Association, which is the national trade association for U.S. ski areas. Their data show that the percentage of skier visits accounted for by season passes are up substantially. So they were around 30% for most of history, and then they
Hmm.
popped to 50, and they've been sitting
Oh,
around 50
okay.
for the last several years. So they're counting any of these multi-mountain passes, these national passes, and a season pass to your local mountain. So it's as far as the price of skiing for frequent skiers, it's never been cheaper to be
Better.
a frequent
Yeah.
skier. And we can go back to that in a minute in that sort of lift ticket problem. But I want to give you another metric that supports the health of skiing. In I've compiled, and I don't have these numbers in front of me, but I've compiled decade by decade numbers of lift installations in the United States, and lifts are very expensive. It's the most crucial part of the lift serve ski experience after the snow, right? And what we've seen is, again, since 2018, since these mega passes came along, a gigantic leap in the amount of capex that the US ski industry is funneling back into their mountains. And it's not even close. The numbers just go
Hmm.
right away. And I haven't been able to get anyone to say explicitly, yes, this is icon money. But to me, James, it reminds me a lot of, I don't know how many of your listeners follow sports rights, right? And the Fox and ESPN will go back and forth bidding for the Big Ten. And before you know it, every Big Ten team is getting $20 million a year that didn't exist before. It's just, and they're public, so they have to disclose this. I imagine the same thing is going on at places like Big Sky, which has seen a gigantic surge in investment, has gone from something of a backwater, a nice ski area, to one of the top three premium ski areas in North America just
Hmm.
in the space of 10 years by investing massively in new lifts and trams and gondolas. And I suspect, again, that a lot of what's driving that is the fact that Big Sky is on the Epic or Icon Pass, excuse me. And the Icon Pass guarantees that they are on that menu of a nationally promoted pass that they don't have to market. So it's done for them. They're part of the ecosystem. And an ironic twist to the Multi-Mountain Pass saga, the advent of the Multi-Mountain Pass appears to have made it easier for large ski areas to remain independent because they have that. I don't know if you want to call it a passive income stream, because they still have to tend to those skiers, but it's more of a guaranteed income stream they had before. For example, Jackson Hole, when it was sold in 2023, did not end up going to Vail or Altera or Boyne. It remained independent, albeit with a group of investors. So we have a lot of metrics suggesting that skiing in North America is in very, very good shape. And I can talk about lost ski areas and what that means in that number, but I don't want to ramble too much.
Well, let me just add a carrot for someone who's very new to skiing. We talk about multi-mountain pass. I mean, obviously, we were both skiers. In the old days,
Mhm.
you would just get a season pass to one ski area, and maybe it was $1,000. It was a small one. Maybe it was $1,500 or whatever it is. And then I forgot when the year was, but Vail Resorts basically had this idea: why don't we, for one price, a pretty affordable price, 700, $800, whatever it was, give access to, like, 20 or 30 ski areas. I don't know how many they started with at the time. Then Icon Altera came along, a similar thing. And so you basically had kind of most of the crown jewel properties in one of these two, or many of them in one of these two passes. And it was a fantastic deal if you were a frequent skier. And I had Epic for many years. Uh, Epic had some issues and some PR issues, and I got upset and I went over to Indy because Indy Pass was kind of like, wait a minute, all these little mom and pops are left behind. Nobody's going to go to the rinky dink hill if they, for $700 they can go to the big ones. Let's kind of like collectivize these. And unlike Vail, these were not owned by Indy; they were just contractual participants, and it was sort of like a rev share deal.
Mhm.
I don't know if that's a profitable effort, but I've had Indy Pass for 4 or 5 years now. Um, is that an accurate summary? I mean, how would you describe this multi-mountain pass thing to the average person?
Yeah, he reshaped the consumer experience with skiing and the consumer relationship to skiing. So to give you some round numbers, the year before Vail launched the Epic Pass, so for 2007 to 8 season, if you wanted a season pass to Vail Mountain in Colorado, it was good only at Vail Mountain in Beaver Creek, which is right next door, and it was something around $1,700. What Vail decided to do was, and for the 2008 to 9 season, is they launched the Epic Pass, which cut the price of a season pass to 500 and some dollars for Vail, Beaver
Mhm.
Creek, Keystone, and Breck, which are also nearby in Colorado, and Heavenly Mountain, which is out in Lake Tahoe, straddling the California Nevada border. So they did this, and it's funny how much it's redefined skiing because it didn't make as much noise as you would think at first. And I remember reading a Fool article about someone who said, I was sitting in an airport and I looked around and everyone had an iPhone. and Apple stock was still 15 bucks or whatever. So I just bought a bunch of it because you can see that sometimes the idea is ahead of the market
Yeah.
reaction, right? So if you look, Epic Pass sales kind of ticked up, ticked up, ticked up, ticked up, and they really exploded in 2018 when the Icon Pass came along because that gave Vail a foil, and it also just mainstreamed this idea of a multi-mountain season pass. So we had this dynamic flip where for years and years, if you wanted to be a season pass holder, it was a very niche product. I didn't sell a lot. You either lived in town, maybe you had a condo, you came up from the city, whatever. And if you wanted lift tickets, they were cheap, easy to come by. I remember my first time skiing at Vail in 2004. I got a 10-day pass for $99.
Oh my
And it was
gosh.
good at Vail,
Oh
Beaver
my.
Creek, Breck, and Keystone.
Whoa.
And we just flew out there and skied around for a week and a half. And it was a lot of fun. But if I would have wanted to be a season pass holder, it would have cost much more. So this flipped that dynamic. Now, uh, Vail had the insight, and you can classify it as predatory or however you want, but it worked that if they started to charge more for lift tickets, and they never said this, but this is exactly what they did. If you started to charge more for lift tickets, then more people would realize that the math worked out better with their season pass, which would essentially move them to a subscription, a subscriber to
Yeah,
the ski
a
area.
SaaS business basically for skiing. Yeah.
Absolutely. So the where we get to this place we are now, where almost every ski area of note in North America and many abroad are on either the Epic, Icon, or Indy passes. There's also the Mountain Collective, which is a very nice little product still. Uh, but ski areas and operators way overcorrected on the day
Mhm.
ticket, and they ended up creating a lot of bad narratives for themselves. And they would get very upset when the media folks like me would point to the $356 lift ticket at Vail Mountain and say, "What are you doing?" But
Yeah.
it's a $356 lift ticket. So, naturally, it's something I'm going to talk about because while it is a very affordable time to be a frequent skier, it is a more frustrating time to become a new skier. And so what we have started to see is a I want to say price war, but we're starting to see softness in the lift ticket market. And one of the first things that Vail Resorts CEO Rob Katz did upon returning this past fall, and we can get to that history if you want, is that he announced a two-part program. The first part of it is that Epic Pass holders have 8 half-off buddy tickets used
Mhm.
anytime during the season, no blackout dates. And if you bought early enough, it was 12 of those. And then the person who bought it could flip that into a down payment for a 2026 to 27 Epic Pass, building on a program that Vail has had for years, but criminally underpromoted called Turn In Your Ticket. I thought it was great. It showed uh, flexibility. It showed that the Vail that was this dynamic market force to redefine skiing was back. But I don't want to get off on too many tangents here. But yes, that's the basic history is that we have gone from a model where it was expensive to be a frequent skier and cheap to be an occasional skier. And we flipped that around. And as a result, frequent skiers are going even more because now they want to get the most out of their investment. I got to get my days in. I had an Indy pass. I paid $300 for it. I want to get that down to $30 a day if I ski 10 days. So who cares what their lift ticket price is? That's what I paid.
Hey guys, quick interruption here. If you're wondering what stocks to buy for 2026, we got you covered and free too. I teamed up with two Curia analysts to put together a free report called 3 Stocks for 2026. To get it, all you have to do is click on the link in the description. You'll also get our weekly Curia review newsletter, also absolutely free. Now, back to the video. Do you think, and by the way, I remember the Vail days. Yeah, I had Epic for 6 or 7 years, and I was always confused between buddy versus ski with a friend. The
Oh,
website
yes.
wasn't clear about it. Like, what the heck's, you know, uh,
It was
um,
a
but
mess.
so let me ask you this, Stuart. I don't know if you have data on this, but with alcohol companies, and it's a sad truth, a small number of heavy drinkers contribute a large portion of the revenue, right? And it's like that with a lot of things, right?
Mhm.
In the US, I think the top 1% is like almost 40 or 50% of consumer spending these days. I mean, it's fun. That's amazing. How much of skiing is driven by these skier visits is driven by a small number of hardballs? And is there a risk that the ski companies, whether a public company like Vail or the rest of them, which are private, could be chasing near-term revenue without putting enough new people in the hopper because the barriers to entry are so high? In other words, catering to the frequent guests, great. They already like skiing, great. But like,
Mhm.
are they doing enough to get new people in the door to help the longevity of the industry?
It's a fair question and a fair observation, and I would say I would love to see inside Vail's database to know for sure. I believe that the answer is that it has made frequent skiers ski more, and it has made less frequent skiers also ski more. Because if you live in New York City and you buy an Epic Pass, that means you could do a weekend at Mount Snow, and then you could do a week at Vail Mountain. And then if it snows in March, you could do another bonus weekend at Stowe. And maybe you wouldn't have done that if you didn't already have your lift tickets. And that sort of that's anecdotal, but it's prevalent enough that I believe it's a pretty typical use case for your multi-mountain pass skier. And what it's done is it's it was when the season pass were expensive that a lot of ski money was coming from the locals, and Vail's found a very good way to bring people into their ecosystem. One of the things that happens when you make someone a season pass holder is it has, I believe, a powerful psychological effect on
Mm,
them. If you go to Vail Mountain and go out the window and buy a lift ticket, you feel like a tourist. If you go to Vail Mountain and you have your Epic Pass in your pocket and you don't even look for the ticket window and you go right to Lion's Head and get on the lift, you feel like a season pass holder because
very
you
good
are
point.
one.
Yeah.
You feel like you belong. So I believe the psychological impact has been really good and has made skiing more sticky than it has before. I want to go back to the capex point that I made real quick
Mhm.
because that's probably the cleanest answer to your question is is this actually generating, more income for the ski areas? They wouldn't be investing it if it wasn't because you know what? Banks don't like ski areas. They don't like to lend to them because they're traditionally too weather dependent and they are afraid that they won't get their money back. Now that's not to say that banks never work with ski areas, but the basic calculus is that it's harder to do so with a ski area than maybe a year round business. So as far as new skiers go and bringing them into the pipeline, it's very, very hard. It always has been. Skiing is cold, hard, expensive. It sucks the first time you do it for 99% of people, including me. You don't understand what the appeal is. It's intimidating. It tends to take place far from where people live. Look at the population centers we discussed earlier. I think before we hit record in Florida and Texas, where there are
Yeah.
no ski areas. And so a lot of people just don't live that close to it. So the industry has long struggled. I'm seeing a couple of different things that I think could be very effective if scaled. One is we have the only indoor ski center in North America across the Hudson River here. It's in New Jersey. It's called Big Snow American Dream. If you ever see a Jets or Giants game, it is right next to MetLife Stadium or whatever it's called these days. And I was very skeptical when Big Snow opened. First of all, anyone who lives in New York Metro knows this thing was a debacle. They built it in like 2005. It sat empty
It said empty
for
for a long time. Yeah.
14 years. And at one point I read they were going to tear it down. It was going to cost $100 million or something crazy. But then an operator came in, and that operator happened to be Joe Hessian, Snow Partners, the same outfit who owns the outdoor Mountain Creek ski area here across the river in New Jersey. And they are excellent operators. They have a number of other tangential businesses. And what they were able to do, because my skepticism was like, okay, it's a 110 vertical foot ski area in a region that has 180 ski areas. There's 100 in New England, 50 in New York, and 30 more in PA. Like, there's no shortage of skiing around here. And so I didn't really understand why anyone would care. But they did a really nice job of keeping it low cost, including everything in the package. So if you walk into Big Snow, let me just throw a number out there for $70, you get the lift ticket, you get the rentals, you get all the gear except gloves, weirdly for some reason, and you get a lesson. So there's instructors out on the hill. So what they've done is create a learning pipeline, and then they launched a product called Triple Play, which essentially is 3 lift tickets to bigger outdoor ski areas that really creates a nice pathway from Big Snow to the next step. They also made a lot of Big Snow into a terrain park. Now, if we can build these big snow ski centers in Atlanta and Dallas and Miami and Phoenix and places where you don't necessarily have access to skiing, because right now, like I said, there's a lot of skiers in Florida and Texas, but most of them probably grew up with parents who skied and would take them to Colorado once a year. But if you have a big snow in your municipality, you're gonna go there on a 4th grade field trip, right? Every kid is gonna go there at some point, and most of them will do it and try it and say, "Aha, that was fun." But some of them will be like me. I didn't ski till I was 14. I went on a bus to the local hill, Mountain, Michigan, 200 vertical feet, and, long out of business at this point, but it was $5 for the lift ticket and $5 for the rental, and I somehow got addicted to skiing even though I didn't grow up with it. All it takes is that nudge in. So indoor ski areas, if snow operating and they want to build out a franchise, if they can figure out a way to uh, get ROI on the amazing construction costs of them, could scale. And these are used all around the world. So there's more than 100 indoor facilities around the world. There's only one
Yeah.
in North America,
Yeah, there are
strangely.
a bunch in China. I used to work in
Yeah.
China frequently. So yeah.
Yeah, a quarter of China's skier visits are indoors.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow. Oh.
it's amazing because
Huh.
you just look at the geography of the country and where the most folks live. So I'm really optimistic about that, and I'm also really optimistic about a lot of these friend programs that they're linking discounted lift tickets to your season pass for your friend, because skiing is really about hanging out with your friends, right? Like that's
Yeah.
what, if you're like a 12-year-old kid, maybe you don't care about skiing, but you definitely want to do what your buddies are doing. And when I have friends who right now will say, "Hey," and that really happens in New York Metro when their kids get about 4 or 5 years old. They're like, "Oh, we want to try skiing." Like, man, I struggle to find a way to tell them to do it affordably. You're talking about New York City professionals, people who have good incomes, but when I can tag that to some sort of buddy discount, that conversation suddenly becomes different. Like, hey, we could go to Stowe, which is my favorite ski area in the East. Lift tickets are 180, but if you use my pass, I got all these buddy tickets. You can get it for 90, which is pretty good for the size of the mountain, or whatever. It's a hypothetical scenario, but I do feel good about the and also the multi mountain passes and the way that they have, because there was always this gap of ski as a kid, kind of lose it in college. Don't do it through your 20s as you establish yourself. But what Epic and I kind of done is lowered the price of skiing to the point where you can always have an Epic or Icon pass when you're going through your sort of transition or searching years or whatever, even if you're not a ski bum living in a ski town. So I feel that the tick up in skier visits somewhat represents that phenomenon, and just the fact that it's so much easier for so many more people to become and stay frequent skiers than it may have been before.
Very interesting. And I'm glad to hear you, as someone in the know, express that optimism about the future. It almost works like a climbing gym concept. Like I'm an outdoor climber. That's how I started climbing, but I use the climbing gym. But most people these days start in the gym first, and then they go outside. Now, climbing gym's a lot cheaper to build than an indoor ski area, so
Yeah.
and cheaper to go to. But it could work a little bit like that same principle. You put these indoor, and there's one I think coming near Washington D.C., Lorton, Virginia. There's a landfill, a big landfill a little bit south of DC here, and they're gonna, I don't know when it's gonna come, but in a couple of years.
Alpine
We'll
X,
see.
they've been on the pod. I think they were
Oh,
on the
okay. Oh,
pod in
you have. Okay, got
2021
it.
and said it would be
Yeah,
live by
yeah,
2023. So,
yeah. Okay,
uh,
so
ni
not yet. Yeah,
nice
yep.
folks, but they have not proven their concept yet.
What do you think the delay is? It like permitting and red tape? Is it just lining up the capital for these types of things? Not just
Are
that one, just writ large.
are your listeners, abundance bros at all? There's a problem in ski country that pervades American culture in general, and that is it is very difficult to build anything, and there are way more ways to stop things than there are to build them, leading to our housing shortage, our
Mhm.
affordability crises in towns and cities of all sizes, especially mountain towns. So that is part of the problem. Every permit takes a long time. There's always someone who doesn't want something. They actually had a pretty good model because, yeah, as you pointed out, they were building on a hill. And Big Snow, for those who haven't seen, is built in the New Jersey swamp. the hill is artificial. So, ideally, you would find a site with a hill, but they have also had some struggles, with financing. So, it's just not someone's gonna figure it out. The best, analog I always hear is Great Wolf Lodge, right?
Mhm, mhm,
Which didn't
mhm.
exist, whatever, 30, 40 years ago, and someone just built this chain of gregarious water parks, which like soul killing to me, but they work and
They're
people love
expensive
them.
too, yeah,
So I,
yeah.
I think that sort of model can work for skiing once someone can scale and figure out how to get economies of scale into the capex. It's just a little tough to get off the
Yep.
ground.
So I want to come back to Vail in a minute, but let me just springboard off something, and this is kind of abstract. But with the Winter Olympics coming up, I was reading something
Mhm,
about how the future Winter Olympics, the Olympic Committee is thinking, well, we're probably going to need a smaller number of reliable destinations in the first place because of global warming, and we might have to modify some of the activities just to make them less weather dependent, which is fair and reasonable. I'd be surprised if they weren't having these conversations. My question is. Um, if we have less professional skiing, do you think having fewer cool role models will that affect American skiers, or is not as much like Europe, where the kids grow up looking up to the skiers?
mhm,
Number one, and B, you actually the immediate impetus for me, my reaching out to you was an article you had written in response to another article. I won't we don't have to name the publication, but basically treating it as a foregone conclusion that global warming was the obvious threat killing skiing.
mhm.
And you said, wait a minute, that's actually not true at all. Um, can I guess let's start with that. Can you unpack that to someone looking at skiing? And because we're gonna talk about Vail in a second. Let me just share this stock chart here because this is the 5 year chart for Vail Resorts,
Mhm.
down 52.67%. MTN is the ticker. So now 50.71%. Somebody looking at this would say, wow, my gosh, obviously, we've had some good winners, we've had some bad winners, but statistically it's getting worse. Global warming is killing skiing. What's your response?
So I'll take that in two parts because the Veil story is interesting and it's worth addressing some of the factors behind that stock slide. Uh, but I want to start by saying that I am not a tinfoil hat global warming, climate change denier. It absolutely is happening. It absolutely is making it more difficult to run a ski area. And I understand how attractive it is to say warming planet on one hand, skiing is weather dependent on the other. This one must be destined to kill this one, but it's just not happening. And the reason it's not happening is very simple and is technology based. Humans are not passive animals. We are masters of our environment and assert ourselves in all kinds of ways. And what we have done over the past, especially few decades, but since the 1960s, is built out a number of very large, very effective snowmaking systems. And then the argument comes in, oh, well, those take up a huge amount of energy and they're bad for the environment. But we're living in an industrialized economy. Everything uses energy. And the story to me is that the amount of energy and the amount of water that a modern snowmaking system uses to create snow creates a lot more snow than the old systems. The number I for a lot less energy, I got
Hmm.
6x is the number I got from one of the snow
Wow.
manufacturers. And it uses less water and it makes snow faster. So there's a ski area that I always point to in southern Indiana. If you're surprised to hear there's a ski area in southern Indiana, it's because it's not easy to do. But that also means that the people who have done it since 1980, when Perfect North Slopes opened, are very, very, very good at it. And they have one of the most amazing snowmaking systems in the world. They can turn on 225 guns at once. They can cover that entire mountain from bare ground to fully open in 48 hours. It is remarkable what they have done. So the snowmaking technology has gotten very, very good. Uh, Snowfall, we're in order for global warming to create a condition in which lift surf skiing was no longer viable, temperatures would have to change in ways that are well beyond most worst case projections because really what you need to make snow is a water source and cold temperatures, and less cold as time goes on. So the first ski area to open in North America the last 3 years has not been Arapahoe Basin or Keystone. It has been Ski Ward, Massachusetts, base elevation 350 feet, because they invested $600,000 in a warm weather snowmaking machine that can make snow in any conditions. So you know, people might be listening to this and saying, okay, well, that's what you think, but what's actually happening? Because look, we had almost 1,000 ski areas in 1960, and now we only have 500 or whatever. And that's true. But what counted as a ski area in 1960 is not the same as what counts as a ski area today. So if you look at the New England Lost Ski Area site, which is an excellent site run by my friend Jeremy Davis, and I love it. He itemizes up to 300 lost ski areas in New York, and you say, "Oh my God, there's only 50 ski areas in New York now." But then you start to read about them, and the story often goes something like this: in 1942, Jim McGovern opened a rope tow in his backyard using an old farm tractor, and local kids could ride it for a nickel. And he kept it open for 2 years. We think this is according to a neighbor of his. So a lot of what we're seeing in ski areas is a very natural. I'm sure you finance folks have a name for this, but a very natural market progression where you start with a lot of competitors, right? 1905 Detroit, like how many people are trying to make cars? You got, you know, hundreds of car brands. And then you kind of go, and some people get better at it, and a lot of fall out, and the easy money goes away. And the guy who was like, oh, I'll just throw a rope tow up my backyard because I had a good snow year last year, he falls away because his neighbors start out competing him, and they start putting in snowmaking, they start putting in better lifts, and they put in better parking lots, and they build nicer lodges. The best enterprises end up dominating the market. That's America, right? That's the story of any American industry that you can name, and it's happened in skiing. And the interesting thing, in the stat that I compiled last summer, because no one had ever done it before, was that while the raw number of ski areas has been declining, number one, it stabilized about 25 years ago. It stabilized around 2000. And it's been, plus or minus 500 in a pretty, consistent line since then. The amount of skiable acreage, which is how ski areas consider themselves, it's a common industry metric, has increased by more than the equivalent of if we had added another Colorado.
Hmm.
So I've taken every ski area in Colorado, which has by far the most ski terrain of any state in America. And if we had cloned every ski area in Colorado and created a whole new state called Ski State, that's how much skiing we've added. Because what's happened is, but first of all, most of the operations on a business were quite small, but some of them have merged and some of them have grown through expansions. And I actually I dug up a Forest Service document from the early 1990s the other day, and this was not an accident. This was not a case of oh no, these ski areas can't survive because of global warming. The Forest Service had a very deliberate policy of allowing leased land, and there's over 100 ski areas leased on Forest Service land. Most of the big ones in the West you're familiar with, though not all. And they did very deliberately, starting in the 1930s, set aside, did a survey to find the best spots for skiing. But some of them didn't turn out to be great spots for skiing. And so they ended up backtracking off them and saying, you know what? For example, Berthoud Pass in Colorado didn't turn
Hmm.
out to be a great place for a ski area because there's really nowhere to park at the top of Berthoud Pass. If anyone has driven US 40 from I-70 up to Winter Park, you've gone past Berthoud Pass. Uh, why not just expand Winter Park? It's better, it's bigger. You can take the train there from Denver. It's run by Alterra Mountain Company. So what they did is there was a redistribution from these little ski areas that were marginal because Beartooth Pass was fine, but there was another one nearby in Rocky Mountain National Park, and they said, you know what, these are why have a bunch of crummy ski areas when we can have one really good one? Because Winter Park's in an awesome snow pocket, and it has perfect terrain for it. So they have expanded those, and so in most cases, growth has come through expansion. So you have fewer, better operators offering a better experience to more skiers again, back to those attendance numbers, than we've ever had in the history of US skiing. So the I wanna kill that, l active ski areas number because it is so misappropriated and thrown out there with no nuance or understanding whatsoever of what it means or what a ski area even is. And there's still little rope tow places around, but a lot of them are, they operate Saturday from 12 to 4 when they get natural snow and they can have enough volunteers. Like, the number I always use is there's about 375 chairlift served public ski areas in America, and that number is relatively stable and has been for quite some time.
So skiing is really getting better and better.
From my
If
point of
you
view, it is. I do
Yeah.
think it has challenges, and I could absolutely lay those out for you. I just think that they're not the most obvious ones that everyone always talks about.
And if you go back to your original, you mentioned automakers. This is a
Yeah.
stat I like to talk about when I talk about business. We've actually had about 2,500 car companies come and go
Right.
in the US. And now what, we've got
Hmm.
three or four, right? We
Hmm.
had 900 e-commerce companies in the late 1990s. Now we basically have Amazon. eBay is almost a rounding error. We had 17,000 cryptocurrencies a couple of years ago. I don't know how many we have now, but it's the natural progress of business to have a lot of little things in the beginning and then settle on a few big winners. And skiing, it sounds like, is no exception. It's more geographically limited. I mean, we kind of know who those big winners are going to be by virtue of the mountains, right? But with transportation easier and cheaper, in the old days, a car lasted 50, 60,000 miles. So it was
Hmm.
probably a big deal to go to some big hill. But nowadays, it's cheap and easy, and that's what people want. And the expansion of the acres really says it all. We have more skiable land than ever before in U.S. history.
That's right.
That's powerful, powerful.
Yeah.
Um, Okay, so with that then, against that backdrop of skiing getting better, the visits are up, the acreage is up, the companies are making money. They figured out this multi-pass model, which it's really good for the goose and gander alike, because if you're a consumer, you get to go to multiple places. If you're in one of those multiple places, you get some kind of like economic distribution. I mean, you may have a bad winter, but somebody else has a good winter. Um, there's unless it's Indy Pass, because you don't benefit from that. But if you're a member of the Vail family, for example,
Hmm.
you do, right. You collectivize to insulate against more erratic weather. Why then? Just to go back to that stock price I showed on the screen for those listening to the audio version a minute ago, Stuart. Yeah, down roughly 53%. Vail Resort. And I'm picking on them, not because I'm picking on them. It's just because they're the public company in this space. So they have data to talk about. Like, why is the stock down so much?
So I will admit that a lot of what I learned about investing, I learned from Motley Fool. I've been a long time adherent and I follow their advice. I find good companies and I hold them forever and I look for good charismatic leaders. And Vail Resorts follows that path and proves that hypothesis almost perfectly. So if you go back to the history of Vail Resorts, obviously Vail Mountain was formed in the early 1960s. They built Beaver Creek in 1980, and they purchased Keystone and Breckenridge in 1997. So it was a small regional operator for most of its history. In fact, that company known as Vail Associates ended up going bankrupt. Along comes a fellow named Rob Katz, who comes in from whatever hedge fund or whatever he was working for, and is appointed CEO after working as sort of an agent for Vail for a long
Wharton
time.
MBA, right? Wasn't he?
Yes, he's a Wharton MBA, super sharp guy. I've had a couple conversations with him on my podcast, very affable, and his history with this company is in 2006 he was appointed CEO. Again, regional operator. If you go back and I actually did some research recently where I looked at what were the largest ski area operators by number of ski areas operated per year going back to basically the beginning of American Skiing Company and its antecedents about the mid 1980s. Vail was not even a top 5 company until 2019.
Hmm.
So that was only 7 years ago.
Oh.
So what happened between 2006 and 2019? Well, Rob Katz flipped the industry business model over in ways we already discussed, right? He launched the Epic Pass. That was the first great insight that he had was, okay, if you make access to premium mountains inexpensive, you will be able to sell this product at volume and move into the subscriber model. The second great insight he has is come along 2012, Vail starts buying ski areas like Wilmot Mountain, Wisconsin, which is, sort of in Chicago metro, Afton Alps outside the Twin Cities, Mount Brighton outside the Detroit metro area in Michigan, which is about 4 million people. Everyone's like, what are you doing? You own Vail, Heavenly, Breckenridge, and Mount Brighton? Like, what is wrong with you? But he was the first one to make that direct connection between where people live. Because again, like I said earlier, most people don't live anywhere near a ski area and where they want to aspire to. And when they see, if they're in Michigan and they're choosing between Mount Holly, Alpine Valley, Pine Knob, and Mount Brighton, the four ski areas around Detroit, and they see that, oh, wait a minute, my Mount Brighton pass will also get me a vacation at Breckenridge. I'll do that because that makes sense. And he very clearly established a strategy of buying markets and unifying where people live with where they want to ski. Then he just kept building every single year from 2008 when they launched the Epic Pass. Then they bought North Star, and they bought Kirkwood, and they bought these Midwest places. Then they bought uh, Triple Peaks, and then they bought Stowe. And so they moved into New England, and then they bought Park City, and then they bought Whistler, and then they bought Stowe, and then they bought all of Peak Resorts, which was this company that sprawled. And so all of a sudden, every single year they're doing something. They're adding partners in Japan, they're adding partners in Europe, and that curve, that stock price is going up like this because Katz is just doing it. Like he basically, the story behind Park City is another company owned it, Powder, and they're still a major operator. They own Snowbird, Copper Mountain, Mount Bachelor, major properties. They're one of their lawyers missed a signature on some lease, and Vail swooped in and basically punched them in the face and took it off their lunch tray. And it got to the point where Park City, like Powder, was going to remove all their lifts from Park City to keep Vail from getting
Wow.
it. But Vail's like, we have the lease, and they bought the lifts from them. But Katz was willing to work that aggressive. Now, am I going to conduct my life that way? No, because I'm from the Midwest and I'm too nice. But my point is, from 2006 when he arrived, 2008 launch of Epic Pass to 2019 when they bought Peak Resorts, Vail was just like boom, 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 up, doing things, and no one could figure out how to compete. So you had all the other resort operators, and they're getting together in these rooms, and they're saying, what are we going to do about the Epic Pass? Because they're making it too easy for people to go to their resorts. So out of Aspen Skiing Company came the Mountain Collective, which was okay. It was 2 days each at some really nice places like Jackson and Alta and Aspen, but it wasn't the same as an unlimited pass. So that kind of come around. And you had something called the Max Pass, which was Boyne and Powder and InfraWest at the time getting together and saying, okay, we'll put all our mountains on this Max Pass. So you get 5 days at each, and you get a discount on your season if you buy a season pass at one of the mountains. It wasn't quite there. And then all of a sudden in 2018, we get this bombshell news. IntraWest is forming together with Mammoth, which has 4 resorts in California, and IntraWest owns at the time, I think, Winter Park, Steamboat, Snowshoe, Stratton in Vermont, and a couple other places. Mammoth, it's like Mammoth, June, Big Bear. So they got the LA market. They buy Deer Valley. They buy Crystal Mountain. They buy Solitude in Utah. So all of a sudden, they say, all right, look out. We're going to do something like the Epic Pass. They come out with the Icon Pass. All of a sudden, Vail, for the first time, has real competition. It has real foil in the market. At first, this is really good for Vail because they get into an arms race. They keep buying stuff and they keep jacking it up. But then a couple of big strategic errors / act of God global events really landed like that meteor that killed the dinosaurs. I mean, it really shook up Vail. So the first one was the Icon Pass and introducing competition. The second was the COVID-19 pandemic hitting exactly when they were trying to integrate 17 new peak resorts plus the 3 triple peak resorts, Crested Butte, Mount Sunapee in New Hampshire, and Okemo in Vermont. And it was just too much to deal with. And then along comes the supply chain shortage, the labor shortage in 2020 to 21. And at the same time, Vail decides, not knowing this labor shortage was coming, to cut Epic Pass prices by 20%, which gives them an immediate boost in 2021 to 22 ski season in Epic Pass sales, but then floods their mountains the next year when they are drastically short staffed at many, many of their key properties. So you now have a bad consumer experience in volume with social media as your broadcast platform, while the Icon Pass simultaneously reacts to negative PR in a more proactive way. Jackson Hole and Aspen locals made it known that they did not like having Jackson Hole and Aspen on the Icon Base Pass, which they were for the first couple years. So Icon Pass not only continues to increase their price, but they move Jackson Hole and Aspen and later Alta, Snow Basin, Sun Valley, their own Deer Valley property off of the Icon Base Pass and allow Jackson Hole and some other places to require reservations from skiers and limit the number of Icon Pass visitors per day. So skiers are saying, okay, yes, Epic Pass is 30% cheaper than Icon, but the experience is better. And Epic stopped adding resorts. I will never understand why they did this. Not only did they stop buying, they stopped adding partners. Icon kept doing it. And the final thing that happened, and these aren't all in perfect order, but this is the general narrative, is Rob Katz stepped down after a successful tenure as CEO in November of 2021 and handed over the reins to Kirsten Lynch. He did stay on the board, but Kirsten decided to focus on other things. She started buying resorts in Europe, which the efficacy of the Epic Pass strategy in Europe is questionable, just given the sheer differences. There's
Yep.
4,000 ski areas in Europe compared to 500 in America. The pricing is generally much lower. You have a lot more government regulation controlling those sorts of things over there. Yeah, that picture is funny.
Oh yeah, I was
Um,
going to talk about the epic lift lines. Yeah. Yep.
yeah. So what you had was you lose your visionary leader, a dynamic competitor comes along, you mistime the they will defend this and say the price cut was not a mistake, but I think they mistimed the price cut just given what the realities in the labor market. And then I think Vail lost its commitment to operational excellence that had defined the company for so long. If you go back and look at when they bought Wilmot, the narrative was, oh, we're going to bring Colorado standards to the Midwest. And then, you fast forward and it's clear in any Eastern or Midwestern market that Vail operates that their local competitors are in most cases able to outcompete them for length of season, uh, atmospheric bona fides by local skiers, and you see Vail undergo a real reputational decline. And let me just put this is the last point I'll make. It is on this particular subject to really tie a bow around this for the 2024 to 25 ski season, the one we just finished. It was one of the more successful ski seasons of all time. The ski industry had a little bit of a dip in their numbers the prior year, 2023 to 24, but they went back up in 2024 to 25. The industry as a whole increased its skier visits in the United States by 1.5%. Which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're talking about 60 million people, it's substantial for a mature industry. Vail's skier visits declined 3.1%. Now, to make that number even worse is the fact that Vail accounts for 25% on average of US skier visits,
Mm,
which
mm.
means the industry as a whole increased their skier visits massively over Vail. So something like a 5 to 6 point difference. So the story behind the stock price, in my opinion, is that the reputational damage combined with the lack of innovation, with the loss of the charismatic leader, combined with increased competition and becoming in just a couple years pivoting from the company everyone was chasing around to the company that was chasing everyone else around. And the way I always put it is ski area operators, no one's afraid of Vail anymore. When they bought into New England in force, the owner of Sugarbush said, whoa, I'm selling to Alterra. Sugarbush is a major resort. It's great. And he'd owned it since 2001. He said, you know what, in 2019, I can't compete with this. Vail has too many resorts in New England now. They had 7. I'm going to sell to Altera so Sugarbush can stay relevant. All those narratives died down because the operational consistency wasn't there. You start to manifest that. You start to see that manifest itself in skier visit numbers, which translates directly to pass sales numbers. That is what Rob Katz came back to when he, or someone, the board, I guess, gently nudged Kirsten Lynch out the door this fall and reassumed his position as CEO.
Very, 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 very good summary on that. And just one, the thing I'll just double click on is I think they could have used you or someone like you, a good PR person, because they had their issues. And COVID was hard for everybody, but you had these situations where uh, there was tons of snow and 30% of the mountain was open because they were underpaying their staff and they couldn't get enough people. And they later raised the minimum wage, did these
Mhm.
things right. But and you might say, well, James, that's only stuff that people in the ski industry know. But the key opinion leaders, the influencers, kind of spread stuff, and so a lot of people in the ski industry had a very bad taste related to Vail Resorts in their mouth after what happened. It gave the impression of a sharp-elbowed company
Mhm.
that was more interested in maybe satisfying public market investors, frankly, my audience, than their customers or certainly their employees. Right? A Motley Fool, we always said, take care of the employees first, and everything else
Mhm.
works. Well, it seemed like from the outside looking in, Vail wasn't doing that, and it seemed like that was a pretty ripe background for someone to say, "I'm going to switch to Icon. I'm going to switch to." I switched to AnyPass literally because of that.
Mhm.
Maybe I should go back to Vail, but like it really irked me, and I'm probably not alone. But if what I'm saying is true, and I'll shut my monologue off in a second, but if what I'm saying is true, and if what you're saying, which is certainly true about the industry, about this, the global warming not being so much of a threat, the snowmaking being awesome, the expanding air, it seems like Vail could be at a good inflection point for someone to buy the stock. If you're a believer that, hey, reputational damage doesn't last forever. Hey, economics are fundamentally good. Hey, we still have a good pipeline for bringing new people into the sport. What would you say to that hypothesis?
I would say that every indication since Rob Katz rejoined the company is that Vail has reassumed the it's not really appropriate to call it founder swagger, but that's how I think of it. When you think of that, I keep saying charismatic leader, but these founder-led companies, like when Fool was like buy Shopify in 2015, I was like, okay, and I'm tell you what, I'm glad I did. and I just held on to it. And so this is not that, right? Because Rob Katz was born after Vail Mountain was founded. However, he's the one who modernized the company and changed skiing. And it was just every single year with Vail, it was innovation after innovation after innovation. And in skiing, when I say innovation, it's innovation in how consumers access and engage with skiing. Like Vail doesn't design lifts or RFID technology. They don't do that, even though they are a pretty good tech company, as most successful companies are these days. But what Rob did immediately is that program I talked about earlier with the half off buddy
Mhm.
tickets with Epic passes, and it was less about the half off the number itself than the type of thinking that it showed. Because what it did is, and you were saying earlier, like, what was the difference between Buddy and Ski? Was no one knew. Vail didn't know. It was ridiculous, and so they took a very complicated system and they did what Vail used to do very well. They simplified it. They made it universal, and they did it to a more extreme value than the rest of the industry was prepared to compete against. Half off every day, no blackouts. And they're basically saying, all right, Christmas week, you come on down and bring your friends. And now the rest of the industry, for the first time in several years, had to say, wow, now we're following Vail again. Because guess what happened
Mhm.
3 weeks later or whatever? Altera announced the same thing. Half off of,
No.
uh, you know, at Select, they don't have as much control over the portfolio with so many partners because they don't own near as many amount as Vail. But they said, okay, half off for tickets, and they limited it to 2 weeks, but no blackouts throughout the season. And they had 40% of some resorts, but they were forced to respond. And I've been told by Altera that they were considering something like that, but certainly not at 50%. And so then we see, I was less enthusiastic about the 30% off tickets, uh, 30 days in advance. However, I still liked that it acknowledged that just as with the Epic Pass, how it rolled out in phases. It was the Epic Pass and the Epic Local Pass and the Epic Summit County Pass. And now we have the Tahoe Pass. And now we have the Day Pass. And now we have Europe. And now we have the Midwest. They are aware, self aware for the first time in a long time, that lift tickets and the price of a walk up lift ticket is a problem. And it went from being something that drove people to their passes to something that is now chasing away people who will never ski with them because they cannot countenance those prices. There is a maximum number of people who will buy an Epic Pass, right? We may have, their goal has always been 75%, and I think that's reasonable, but I don't think that you're going to get above that. But what Rob is showing right now with the discount program and the turn in your ticket, the aggressive turn in your ticket, is uh, Vail is going to continue to redefine the consumer listserv skiing experience. And you all are going to have to, meaning other operators, are going to have to react to it because we are done reacting to you. And we are taking our place back as the biggest and most important company in skiing, which is our birthright. That's me, you know. I, they've never said that. That's me saying that because that is how I view it through my very American, like, conquering, warmongering lens.
And very eloquent lens. I can't imagine them phrasing it like that either. Do you think, just to wrap up Vail, do you think the industry is a good fit for a publicly traded company? Some industries is just tough to be public in.
I don't want to step too far out of my lane here. And I don't want to say that, like I said, Motley Fool is sort of my, go to as far as investing philosophy. So I don't have the expertise that a lot of your listeners will, and nor will I claim to. I have a couple thoughts. First, I do wonder if skiing is actually a growth industry. I think the growth you saw in Vail Resorts was probably more the result of unexercised efficiencies of scale in operating a company and streamlining pass holders and moving them to a subscription model than anything else. There might be a one-time bump from that, and there are some old ski areas you can fix up. But Vail's not interested in doing that. It's almost impossible to build a new ski area in North America. Well, in the United States, in Canada, it's much easier, but in the United States, just because of all the reasons I spoke about earlier. So I I wouldn't buy Vail thinking it's gonna like 10x, but could it double and get back to where it was? Absolutely. And there is a lot of growth. So there are about 6,000 ski areas on the planet. Vail owns 42 of those. Uh, and there is enormous opportunity. The United States ski market, large as it is nothing compared to the Alps ski market. The per capita numbers that places like Austria, which is a nation of 8 million people, put up, or France or Switzerland
Hmm.
are just mind boggling. If Vail can figure out the cultural puzzle and successfully scale the multi mountain pass model, uh, into other ski markets, both established and emerging. So there are emerging. China is building ski areas at a
Yep.
frenetic pace because, like everything else in China, they went from 1890 to 2000 in 10 years, right? So they're catching up, but they're doing it without some of the obstacles that we had before of having to go through the technology curve. So there's that market. The Japanese market has 400 some ski areas, and there are emerging markets all over the
So
world.
Japan and the US have about the same number of ski areas.
Yeah,
Interesting.
it's crazy.
Huh,
It's crazy.
huh.
They tend to be a little smaller in Japan.
I would imagine,
Japan
yeah.
gets a lot of snow. It's the snowiest country in the world. It's an amazing place. But it's not going to be like Vail Resorts is not going to be like a Shopify or a Tesla or something. But it could be you know, a good.
Be a value play
Yeah,
maybe, beaten
yeah.
down. By the way, I skied twice, at least twice in China that I can recall. Um, I was near once in Xinjiang, which is the northwest, and once near Beijing, and like this beautiful, it was a new ski. It was a bottom down resort, but they had a pretty nice lodge at the top. And I
Yeah.
walked in there to go to the bathroom, and they had this beautiful marble floor, and everybody's slipping and falling because whoever built the thing obviously was not a skier and thought, oh, let's make this beautiful floor. But it's just, I'm sure now it's covered with rugs that cover up all the marble. But they're
Yeah.
learning. And there were no trail mats. Right? You just had to. I mean, luckily I can kind of go anywhere, but a lot of the skiers there couldn't, and you just kind of had to go with the flow. But they
Oh,
will
that's a
work. I'm sure
trip.
by now those kinks are worked out. China moves very quickly.
Yeah, they're getting there. I did an analysis recently because Icon Pass added the first was the first US pass, ski pass to add a ski area in China. And their numbers are still very much suggestive of an emerging market. Like I said, 25% of their skier visits are indoors. Only a small handful of their ski areas have what we would consider to be a competitive vertical drop or skiable acreage number. Only a little over a dozen have a high speed chairlift. So,
Mhm.
their most common lift type over there is carpet. And that's because they have
That's
their
who skis there.
demographic is learning. But
Yep.
but yes, I have no doubt that China will, once they build that consumer economy, will move very quickly, and we'll have some very nice ski areas, hopefully, for me to go explore.
Awesome. I'm sure you will. I'm sure you will.
Yeah.
Tax deductible. So I'll check. I'll check more into Vail. It's interesting to me. I agree with you. Eventually, it's probably going to grow with the population rate. Something like that. It's just one of those things. You can only get so many people, and there's only you know so much catalyst, I guess, for these things. But it's certainly trading at a very what looks like a low price, below the S&P 500 average PE ratio. So there's not a ton of positivity priced into this stock, and it sounds like there are some catalysts from somebody who is literally one of the most broadly knowledgeable people on skiing in North America in existence. So with that, what's next on your list, Stuart? Where are you going to ski?
Oh, I'm headed to Colorado on Sunday. So we're recording this on February 5th. So Sunday, February 8th, Super Bowl Sunday. I couldn't figure out why my flight was so cheap. And then, I mean, I love football, but I didn't have a team in the Super Bowl, and I booked it, and I was like, oh, that's amazing. So I should travel on Super Bowl Sunday every year. But I'm headed out there for 2 weeks. I've actually canceled a bunch of Western trips and stayed in the East because it's been so good. So
Yeah.
I'll be out
Oh,
in Vail
and
for
the
12.
worst
Yeah.
snow pack in recorded history or something like that in Colorado and parts of Utah.
Yeah, yeah, and
I
and
feel
and I
bad for
think
them.
it's important to point out that that follows, uh, you know, 2 3 winters ago, just about every skier in Utah and California set all-time records for
Yep.
snowfall. It's funny, there's this site, New England Ski History, and I go back and read it, and it'll talk about, a well-known resort today, like Cranmore, for example, that, the 1957 season, they weren't able to open until February because there was a big thaw and it rained, and there was no
Hmm.
snow
Hmm.
until, um, mid-January. So, it, you know, the climate has always been very unpredictable. It's always been very unfavorable to skiing. Consumer standards about what an acceptable ski area is have risen so much because of the technological advances that, again, we get back to that competitive dynamic where the best simply rise. So it's unfortunate what's happening in the West. I won't say that it's not climate change related, but what I will say is that it's not an indicator that skiing is over in the West or anywhere else.
Yep, and knowing that you're going there soon, I will, as they say, pray for snow. Um, Stuart Winchester, if somebody says this guy is pretty cool, I'd like to know more. Where would you send that person?
Stormskiing.com. That is
Okay.
my website. And there you can sign up for the Storm Skiing newsletter. And that is a Substack newsletter that will come directly to your inbox. There are free versions, and then you can upgrade to the paid version when you want to see everything below the paywall. I tend to put out at least 100 articles a year. I am streaky. There's not a schedule. So I might put out 5 articles next week and one the week after. But I do go for consistent quality over time and try to make sure that when I put something out, it's something worth reading. So it's not a place for breaking news so much as analysis. And when past season comes, I'll tell you the big time to get in on it on the Storm is late February, early March, because that's when all the pass offerings come out. And I'll add that one of the things I'm most excited about is that Rob Katz in one of his reintroductory press conferences hinted that there could be major changes coming to the Epic Pass
Yeah.
because he said that might be me reading into his comment that they will reassess the portfolio from top to bottom, the pass suite. So I'm super excited to see how that could shake up the pass industry. So I think there's a lot of opportunity around off-peak passes, Saturdays. I think more expensive on the top end and cheaper on the low end. So I have no doubt that whatever Vail does from this point on, it will be exciting, and I'll be covering it in more detail than you could ever imagine at the storm. It is a newsletter for ski nerds, so you have found your place.
And I was going to say, if someone's a data analysis type and wants to compare the passes blow by blow, you have, I'm going to use the word ginormous, a ginormous spreadsheet, very interestingly color coded by all, by all metrics that
Right.
people will have access to if they subscribe.
Yeah, it's I call them my big dumb charts. I'm essentially building this airplane while I'm flying it of information on things I was tired of looking up elsewhere. And I sometimes I just need the base elevation of, Wachusett, and I don't want to go digging for it. So I've started to compile everything in there, and it's big and it's messy, but Joel Gratz, the founder of a service I love, Open Snow, that I've been using for years, which is the sort of premium go to for hardcore skiers weather app. He came on my podcast, and he's an excellent guest. He talked about how he started it as a newsletter for 10 people or whatever, an email, and he's grown it to a giant business with all these employees. And his quote was, I move very slow, but I'm always moving. And I've tried to adopt that myself. So the big dumb charts will one day be something useful. In the meantime, I am opening them out of benevolence, but you may come away from them thinking I'm slightly insane, which may not be off.
There's only one all-in source for lift service skiing information, and that is the Storm Skiing Journal. And there's only one Stuart Winchester, and I'm certainly glad to have you, Stuart. Thank you so much. Safe travels this coming weekend.
James, thanks for the opportunity, and I know we're sort of in the same neighborhood, but when you get up this way or you wanna take some turns, let's do it.
I'd be delighted to, Stuart.
Yeah. All right, great.
Awesome. Thank you so
All
much.
right, take care.